Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, November 17th, 2025. Our friend Professor Marandi is here with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Hi, Nima. Thank you very much for inviting me again.
Let me start, Professor, with what we've heard from Lebanon. It seems that the Israeli drones are over Beirut, and when you look at the situation in Lebanon, do you think that we are heading towards some sort of confrontation between the Lebanese army, or maybe Hezbollah and Israeli IDF?
Yes, it's possible. Netanyahu is a person who clearly needs crises in order to remain in power. This is a discussion that we've been having for over 2 years now, and I think many of your guests probably think the same. From the very beginning, it was clear that Netanyahu did not want a ceasefire. During the first 2 3 months, it was many people were predicting the genocide to stop, and then it kept going on, and Biden did nothing about it. Then Trump did nothing about it. All of them enabled it. They both presidents, the Europeans, and every time Netanyahu, instead of backing down, he push further. So whether it's Gaza or Lebanon or Syria, where he and Erdogan and Biden together overthrew the Syrian government, or Yemen, these are all escalations that came out as a result of his the needs of Netanyahu himself, and of course his allies that keep him in power, the fanatical right wing Zionists. And of course, the war with Iran was the same. Now, of course, we know that the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor was lying, and that the United States was along. They were. Trump was behind the war from day one. But at the end of the day, it was based on Netanyahu's needs. The reason I think why Trump is constantly pushing for some sort of pardon for Netanyahu is probably because the Trump regime and many Zionists recognize that Netanyahu is destroying the Israeli regime. We now see how inside the United States the people have turned against it. First, it was the leftists, then it was the liberals, and now the right. This is a civil war which the Zionists are losing on all fronts, and it's only going to get worse. So I think Trump probably would want to see him get a pardon so that he would not feel the need to continue with this war. Whether that's true or not, that's another issue. But I think for now, we should be expecting escalation, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon, or whether it's with Iran.
Here is what Donald Trump said. It seems that he's considering new sanctions on Iran, but because he was asked about the sanctions on Russia that the Republicans are preparing to impose on Russia, and he said something responding to that question. He said something about Iran. Here is what he said, Professor.
Well, I hear they're doing that, and that's okay with me. They're passing legislation, or the Republicans are putting in legislation that very tough. It's sanctioning, et cetera, on any country doing business with Russia. They may add Iran to that, as you know. I suggested it. So any country that does business with Russia will be very severely sanctioned. We may add Iran to the formula, yeah.
Yeah. He wants to add Iran to the sanctions, but after all, looking at the attitude of the Trump administration, what do they want to achieve about it? Because I don't know if there is any other sanction, any additional sanction to be imposed on Iran, because everything is
Nima,
sanctioned.
Nima, you have to start learning English. Me too. There's a word called maximum. It's called maximum pressure. We have to learn the word. Apparently, it does not mean, from our understanding, it doesn't mean the most. It's maximum pressure. It's apparently this it doesn't mean what we used to think it means. So we have to relearn the English language. So when Trump says he's imposed maximum pressure sanctions, that apparently doesn't mean that he's done everything he can. So obviously, your English and my English has to improve. We have to, the maximum apparently means somewhere in the middle. But At the end of the day, he's already imposed maximum pressure sanctions. What else can he do? What can he do against Iran? Nothing. In fact, the sanctions against Russia are not as extensive as Iran. I mean, the Russians say that they're the most sanctioned country in the world. Actually, that's not the case. They're getting nearer and nearer to Iran. But the Iranian sanctions regime is very comprehensive and it goes back decades. But what he is doing is he's pushing, first of all, Russia closer to Iran. Second of all, he is by doing this, by putting this a law through Congress, he is closing the doors to any negotiations. Why? Because part of the sanctions regime is based on law, and part of it is based on presidential authority. If those sanctions that are linked to presidential authority are handed over to Congress, then there's no negotiation in future because the US government cannot remove anything. So his scope of authority, and the United States is very good at imposing sanctions. It's very terrible at removing sanctions. We discussed this before. Nelson Mandela, when he was the head of the ANC, the United States declared him to be a terrorist and the ANC as a terrorist organization. He was freed from prison. He was still a terrorist. He became president. He was still a terrorist. He ended his term in office. He was still a terrorist. Years later, after he retired from politics, the United States removed him and the ANC from the sanctions, from the terrorist designation. Once the United States imposes something, it doesn't remove it easily. So the incentive for any negotiations between Iran and the United States decline because they know that if Trump sends someone to mediate to talk with Iran, that person does not have any authority. The JCPOA itself was limited partially because the United States government at that time did not have the authority to remove all the sanctions. It only had the authority to remove some of the sanctions. The rest were sanctions that were imposed through law. So by doing this, Trump is closing the door to Iran and Russia for a very long time. And that is good for Iran because it allows Russia to have very long-term planning with Iran in future because they know that once the laws have been passed, those laws are not going to be removed because the president may want them removed, but Congress may not accept to do so. In addition to that, the United States, we saw how the United States and the Europeans tried to use the snapback mechanism against Iran just recently. And we discussed this on your show. The snapback mechanism, they were portraying it through their Persian language media and through propaganda as decisive and how it's going to crush the Iranian economy. And I think I said on your show that it's going to, for a while, it's going to spook the markets. But after a few weeks, once they've used it and people see that it had no effect, they lose their leverage. The United States has lost its leverage. And I think the snapback mechanism that they tried to use was a clear sign of that. Not only did they push Russia and China closer to Iran, and they issued that statement saying they do not recognize any of the UN Security Council resolutions, but also they showed ordinary Iranians that the European and American attempt to crush the economy failed completely. Right now, no one in Tehran is talking about snapback. No one is talking about new sanctions because nothing happened. So Trump, now that, again, you and I have to relearn our English, maximum pressure sanctions, once they've been imposed, what is there to impose that makes it more maximum than maximum? Unless, again, you and I have to relearn the word, and it means something different from what we learned at school. So I see this as a useless endeavor. It is good for Iran. It is good for Iran because it makes the Russians more inclined to forget about Europe and the United States permanently and to rethink their foreign policy completely. And we will be there to engage with them. The Iranians have made a decisive decision. You know Iranian politics. You saw how the Speaker of Parliament and how others have spoken about Iran's relationship, and how the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani, how the foreign minister, how the president, how everyone has spoken about Iran's relationship with Russia and China. So Iran has made a decision. And by behaving in this sort of manner, whether it's against Russia or China or anyone else, the United States is only consolidating for the Iranians this policy.
Professor Marandi, we've heard from the some reports show that Iran has sent emergency alerts to citizens' mobile phone nationwide, signaling that it may be preparing for war in December. And what is the understanding on the part of the officials in Iran? Do they really believe that we're going to have a new round of attack, or maybe some sort of war, or they see the possibility of talks, negotiations, communications?
No, they don't believe that there's going to be a war, nor do they believe that war is not possible. There's no shift in Tehran. The belief in Tehran is that you have to prepare for war in order to prevent the Israeli regime and its Western allies from carrying out new aggression. And if they do carry out the aggression anyway, that they pay the price for it. That's the policy. They're working to defend, to strengthen their defense capabilities and to strengthen their offensive capabilities. And of course, since the Israeli regime is barbaric, since the EU, they are barbaric, since the British, the Canadians, and the Americans, these regimes are all barbaric, the Iranians know that there could be a surprise attack at any time. They'll target apartment buildings, they'll target children, they'll target families. And then Western media will say that these are precision strikes and this is an intelligence coup, but in reality, they'll be targeting ordinary people. So the Iranians are preparing themselves. And one way of preparing the country is to have a mechanism by which they can immediately tell people to be prepared in case there is some sort of attack, or if there's some other issue, an earthquake or some natural disaster. But this is something very simple. The Iranians are, it is a part of improving the country's ability to protect its citizens. But there's no new information with regards to potential war. The Iranians are assuming that there is going to be war, not because they really think it will necessarily happen, but in order to be better prepared, they have to assume that aggression will be carried out. So it is possible that we will have war in December. It is possible that we won't have war in December. But the Iranians are going to prepare themselves as if war is tonight.
As we've learned from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he said that the Americans are trying to talk with Iranians. They're trying to push for the talks. But whatever happens, Professor Marandi, do you think that the first step for Americans to show that they're serious in their attitude, in if they want to negotiate, if they want some sort of talks with Iranian, would be the sanctions? Start removing the sanctions on Iran. What is that the first step that would work?
Okay, let me point something out here. I don't know if you know this, Nima, or not, but your show is watched by some people who are actually influential. And I know this because I've been told so. Over the past, over the last few, I don't know, recently, I've had talks with people from the West, in general. And the problem in our discussions, this, I think, was clear. And I pointed this out to them. The problem in the West, Nima, is that they cannot come to the recognition that Iran is not going away. They like to believe their propaganda that Iran is a regime. Often when I say Western regimes, I say it because that's how they speak of Iran. So I reciprocate as an Iranian or as a critic of the West. They believe Iran is a regime. And a regime is something unstable. So if there's protest somewhere, if a group of men or women are protesting, they say, "Oh, there's instability." And but in the West, if you have the yellow jackets, or if you have people on the streets protesting, they never say that, "Oh, there's instability in Europe or the United States." But if the same thing happens in Iran, they say it's instability. If in the West there are fights between coalition members or the opposition party and the government, they call it checks and balances and politics. In Iran, they call it a power struggle, right? So in Iran, we have politics every day. The websites, the Telegram channels, they're attacking each other on Twitter, different factions, supporters of the administration, opponents of the administration, supporters of the, I don't know, the head of judiciary, the opponents of him, the parliament, the leader, everyone. You'll see that all the time in Iran, but they don't recognize this because they live within their bubble, where Iran is an unstable regime, and that is why when the Israeli regime attacked, they all thought that Iran is going to collapse because they believe their own nonsense. They don't understand that Iran is a very sophisticated country with checks and balances. You have public participation in politics. Iranian women are much more empowered than other parts of this region, and I would argue Iranian women are much more respected than Western women in the West. Iranian women can walk the streets of Tehran at 12 p.m. on their own, and they can be pretty sure that no one will touch them, no one will harass them. That's not something that you can say about many Western cities. We have women scientists, we have women parliamentarians, we have women academics, we have women taxi drivers, we have women pilots. But they want to see everything about Iran as abnormal, and Iran being a regime. And so the regime does not have permanency. It is going to fall. So they will never think about Iran 20 years from now. They'll say 20 years from now, it'll be different. We'll wait it out. The chances that they'll be different are greater than Iran. Or let's say they speak about the leader after the leader. Have no doubt that the leader who's very healthy, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, if he passes away, there'll be a new leader. The constitutional process will be in place, and you'll have the same Islamic Republic of Iran. But they can't get this through that bubble. That bubble protects them from reality. So when they negotiate, they cannot negotiate with Iran, and that they have the same problem with Russia, by the way, and with China. They think that they are going to go away because they think that they are normal and everyone else is abnormal. And all those who are abnormal, they will not last, but they're going to be there for good. The reality is that as a result of this, they cannot negotiate with Iran with success because they cannot recognize that Iran is not afraid of its position. It is very self confident, it has confidence about its strength. And so Iran is not going to be intimidated by Trump. When Trump says you have to give up nuclear enrichment, Iran is not going to give up nuclear enrichment. If Trump says Iran has to give up its missile capabilities, Iran is not going to do that. They think that through sanctions and intimidation and war that will change. That's not going to change. And I think they've been proven wrong time after time after time, but because they live in that bubble, reality still doesn't get through. They think next time, hopefully next time, the regime, as they like to call it, will be gone. So, as long as the United States and Europeans don't take negotiations seriously, as long as they don't come to the recognition that Iran is here to stay, Iran was here thousands of years before the United States came into existence and thousands of years before the European countries came into existence. And it will be here probably after the United States has been, thanks to Trump and the likes of Trump's efforts, it goes downhill. Iran will probably be here for a very, very long time afterwards. If they come to that recognition that Iran is a normal country, that when Iran, there is debate, it's not infighting and internal struggle, it's politics. When there are protests in Iran, if they look at it as a protest in their own countries and they see this as normal, then they can come and negotiate with Iran in a realistic sense. Until that happens, until there's a change in mentality in the West, until there's that bubble of arrogance is burst, I'm afraid that I'm not optimistic about any real long term change in the relationship. I would like to have improved relations with Europe. I would like to have normal relations with the United States. But the problem does not lie in Tehran. It never did lie in Tehran. But that's something that they fail to get through their thick skulls. Iran is not anti American in the sense that it hates the United States and as a nation. Iran is against US foreign policy because US foreign policy is aggressive, abusive, and the United States is hegemonic and it has imperial ambitions. It is an imperialist power which wants more power. Iran won't accept that. This is the state of play. If the United States were to behave differently toward during the I mean, the Americans like to cry about Iranians chanting death to America. Just recently, we saw Trump's son say that the Iranians every day they're chanting death to America, as if like you walk down the streets in Tehran, people are chanting death to America. Uh, in ceremonies, political ceremonies, when people chant death to America, it's like chanting Yankee Go Home. It is nothing. When people say Yankee go home in Latin America, they're not saying like Americans with who are in those countries should leave the country, and no, they're talking about the regime in Washington. So death to America, when they say that, they're talking about U.S. foreign policy, just like the Soviet Union. You recall, well, you're younger, but in the past, the Iranians also chanted death to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan and it was also supporting Saddam Hussein. After the Soviet Union changed its policy near the end, um, after Perestroika and Glasnost and Gorbachev's, that period, the relationship improved and Iranians stopped chanting slogans against the Soviet Union. And of course, then when the Soviet Union collapsed, Iran's relationship with Russia was normal, and today we see the relationship is excellent. The relationship between Iran and Russia is excellent. It's better today than it's probably ever been. So the problem with the United States, and sorry for taking so long in my response, the problem with the United States is that they cannot wrap, they cannot come to terms with reality. Whenever they come to terms with reality, they can improve the relationship. But until then, I think this is how things are going to be. The Europeans and the Americans are going to constantly try to do something, but it will not be useful or impactful. And it's not just Iran. Increasingly, their behavior towards the entire global majority is erratic, it's arrogant, and it's isolating them more than anyone else.
We had Professor Marandi during the war between Iran and Israel. We had the German chancellor coming out and saying that Israel is doing our dirty job against Iran. Many of us would ask, what is the problem between Iran and Germany? I have never seen anything in Iran against Germany in my lifetime. And as I follow the Iranian policies, internal and external policies, what is that in your opinion?
You know, before Corona, I think maybe 14, 15 years ago, actually, a long time ago, a delegation of parliamentarians or MPs from Germany came to Tehran. And one of them was a woman from the Green Party. And she was very arrogant. And they came to my faculty, and I was among the four or five. There were four or five, six of them, I think. And there were like, I don't know, five or six professors sitting and having a discussion with them. And she was lecturing us. And she was talking about human rights and how we violate human rights and all that nonsense. And then I said, you to her, you are in violation of you've violated my human rights. I survived two chemical attacks because of your regime. And one of my colleagues recently retired. His brother died of chemical weapons just a few years ago. I don't remember if it was after this or before this. But I said that his brother is either died or he's very ill because of your chemical weapons. The Germans have played a very evil role in contemporary Iranian history. The Germans have gassed us. They speak about gas chambers. Well, that's what they did to us. They gassed us. They tried to kill. They helped Saddam Hussein slaughter 6,500 people in Halabja. I went to Halabja soon afterwards. The Germans did that. So when they speak about their dirty work, they're right. They're right. They do a lot of dirty work. And the genocide in Gaza and the genocidal attacks in Lebanon and the genocidal attacks against Iran. And you recall when during the war, when I spoke to you, I told you very close to where I live, and you know Tehran, I think, pretty close to where I live. Like I have to find out the number, but something between 65, 70 people were slaughtered in a building, families, including like 20, 25 children. I don't know the exact number. I have to find out because every time I speak about this, I'm not sure about the numbers. In order to kill one person, they massacred everyone in the building. And you can walk from here to there. It's a long walk, but you can walk. So they supported this attack. So the Germans, the French, the British, the Americans, the crimes that they've committed against the Iranians go back a long way. But the Iranians have never done anything, against the Europeans or the Americans. Nothing that can even compare. The Americans like to say in Beirut they were attacked by Hezbollah. Well, first of all, Hezbollah was not even, they didn't even exist at that time as it does today. And it's between 1982 and 1985 it was being created. But in any case, they were occupying Lebanon. They were occupying the country, and the people in that country were resisting. They cannot blame Iran for the resistance of the people in Lebanon. They cannot blame the Lebanese for resisting occupation. Just as Americans have no right to complain about Iraqis resisting the occupation. Whether Iran helped them or not is irrelevant. They are in no position to complain. But have the Iranians occupied any territory of the United States or Europe? Are their graveyards full of dead people who've been killed by Iranians? A while back, Max Blumenthal came to Iran, and we went to the cemetery in southern Tehran, and we went to the war cemetery, and we had it's online if your viewers want to watch it. It's like a hour long program where Max and I have this walk. He's a very, very. I'm glad he's on your show. He's a hero, Jew, anti-Zionist, courageous human being, and I think people like Max and Katie Halper and others like all these there are so many Jews now that are at the forefront of the resistance against apartheid and genocide that I think anyone who conflates Judaism and Zionism is doing a grave injustice because of the role that Jews are playing against this regime. But Max, when he came to, I think during our talk, I said all of these people who've died in the cemetery and all the people who died in the war with Saddam Hussein, their blood, the Americans have blood on their hands, the regime in Washington, the Europeans, because they supported Saddam. They enabled him to attack the country and to continue the war with Iran. So are European graveyards full of dead people that the Iranians have killed? Are American graveyards filled with people who've been killed by Iranians? Do you have thousands of Europeans and Americans who've died of gas attacks? But we do. So Germany is in no position to complain about human rights or about terrorism or about they're the ones who do dirty work. They have others to carry out their dirty work, and they have the blood of hundreds of thousands of Iranians on their hand. So they're neither more civilized than we are. They're not more. They are by no means more humane. They're nowhere near us when it comes to humanity. The Iranians, the Yemenis, and Hezbollah, and the resistance in Iraq. They are at the height of humanity, at the height of humanity. They are the only ones who've made sacrifices for the people of Gaza, for the people of Palestine. Their blood, the blood of Iranians and Iraqis and Syrians before the Americans and the Israelis and Erdogan brought ISIS and Al Qaeda to power. But the Lebanese and the Yemeni people, their blood has been spilt for the people of Gaza to stop the genocide, whereas the Europeans and the Americans fueled the genocide, and regional countries enabled the genocide. So the Europeans have they're in no position to lecture Iran about anything. And yes, that the German chancellor simply exposed the Germans further by saying that this genocidal apartheid regime slaughters on behalf of the West, on behalf of Germany.
Professor Marandi, we have, in at the UN, the Security Council, it seems that they're going to talk about the Palestinian state. And Netanyahu came out and said he doesn't, he rejects whatever is going on at the UN. But after all, looking at Palestine today and reality of Palestine, how is that possible, two-state solution? In my opinion, you look at the West Bank. The settlers just captured all of the West Bank and they're killing the people. The genocide is going on in the West Bank as it's going on in Gaza, and they're talking about two-state solution. Is that still a viable choice?
They're killing kids in the West Bank, literally every day, kids. They're shooting kids. Do you hear this on the BBC? On CNN? Do you see it on CNN? Is the New York Times saying anything about it? Is the Guardian complaining about it? No. Are Western diplomats outraged? No. They murdered just recently an American Lebanese family in southern Lebanon. Three kids and their father, all Americans. Did the Americans, did the Western American media, were they outraged? No, of course not. The plan was never to have a two-state solution. Nima, that was never the plan. The Europeans never planned to bring about a two-state solution. The two-state solution from day one was a myth to buy time for the Israelis to slowly colonize the West Bank, and they've been doing that ever since. And now it's only becoming more brutal and more aggressive. Over the last couple of years, it's gone, they've gone crazy. And everyone sees it, but the West hides it. Western social media hides it, Western media hides it, Western regimes hide it because they are with the Israelis. Remember, as you pointed out, the German chancellor, Israel does our dirty work for us. They're in the same camp. This genocide is a joint project. It is a joint operation. No one should think that this is just carried out by Netanyahu. This is a collective genocide. The collective West is behind this genocide, this ongoing genocide. So no, the objective. Alistair Crook, who hopefully you can have on your show one day, he told me this. I don't know if he said it online, but he said this to me on more than one occasion. That when he was in occupied Palestine, the Israelis took him to the West Bank, and he went to some of these, these towns and these settler uh, towns. This was a long time ago. He said these people were crazy. He said the most radical and fanatical and crazy people are put in the West Bank by the Israeli regime. Why? Because they want to make sure that they never leave voluntarily, of course. The intention from day one was to cut. Does anyone think that the Europeans didn't know this? They have diplomats, they have embassies. Uh, they've been in Palestine. They are very close friends. They know exactly what's going on. They close their eyes to the genocide. They close their eyes to the ethnic cleansing. They close their eyes to the theft. Because when it comes to Palestinians, theft is legitimate. Slaughter is okay. Seriously, I'm not exaggerating. Slaughtering Lebanese children is fine, even if they have American passports. No problem. Slaughtering Palestinian children, even if they have American passports, it's no problem. The Americans have no problem with it, nor do the Europeans. No one should fool themselves. Every single European diplomat who's in any embassy anywhere in the world, they are a part of this genocide. All Western journalists who are in legacy media, all of them are part of this genocide because they willfully chose and choose to close their eyes or try to keep our eyes closed to the reality of what's going on. So, no, there was never an intention for a two state solution. Not now, not 2 years ago, not 20 years ago. The objective was to enable the Israeli regime to get away with ethnic cleansing slowly. But now the regime, because it's become so fanatical and crazy, they've put aside the more sophisticated and slow and careful way in which they would kill people, take their land slowly, piece by piece. Now they're just crude about it. They kill, they slaughter. We're all Amalek, and that's why. And this is their mistake, Nima, because now the world has woken up to the reality of what the Israeli regime is all about. It is a genocidal colony. The Jews in Palestine come from different parts of the world. They're not Semites. The Palestinians are the Semites. And not all Jews support Israel, or not all Jews are Zionists. People are waking up to this reality. They see that it is a genocidal regime. They see that it didn't exist for more than a few decades because people are reading about history. When they watch all these dead babies and they see all these torn apart, these kids who are torn apart. And, of course, Western analysts joke about them on television. On CNN, they talk about the dead babies and laugh. And the audience, their audience, of course, not ordinary people, they laugh about these genocidal acts. But people are waking up. So they see that this is a regime that is infinitely worse than apartheid South Africa, infinitely worse. This is their fatal mistake. They went about it in a way which has created a global awakening and an awakening in the United States itself, which is the main sponsor of terrorism and racism and ethnic cleansing. So the objective from day one was to enable the Israeli regime, not to hinder colonization. But the Israeli regime now is foolish, out of control, and fanatical. And that's why I believe the regime is going downhill very fast.
We've learned that IRGC has seized Azerbaijani linked oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. It seems that this tanker is related to one of the Jewish oligarchs, which has close ties with Aliyev in Azerbaijan. What was the message on the part of the IRGC in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I have to point, and this is something that some of these Western diplomats and officials, when they speak with me, they don't seem to comprehend or they don't recognize this. The IRGC does not make decisions. The armed forces does not make decisions. If a ship is going to be stopped, this is a decision made by the state, and the armed forces implement the decision made by the state. It has nothing to do with the. So there are no hardliners or reformists. It is the state. And the state has a broad scope of people within it that debate issues and they come to a conclusion. If they stop a ship, there could be many reasons. Part of the cargo could be smuggled Iranian fuel that was taken and boarded on this ship. That makes it illicit. Because you know as well as I, Iranian fuel is heavily subsidized. And so there's a very strong incentive to smuggle fuel. They do that through the Afghanistan border, through all of our borders. A lot of our gasoline in Iran, one type of fuel. Gasoline in Iran costs what? Like something like 1 cent a liter. Yes, your viewers are probably turning up the volume. They thought they didn't hear it. Gasoline in Iran is 1 cent a liter, roughly. Right? Am I correct? More or less. 1.5 cents, let's say. 2 cents, but 1 cent. So a lot of that fuel is smuggled. And then some of that could have been taken to that ship and then the Iranians are going to stop it. I do not know the reason why it was stopped. There could be many reasons why this ship was stopped. But it is not some decision made by some commander somewhere. That's not how Iran works. I was just recently told by a Western, an influential person in the West, let's say, that when Iran signed the deal in Cairo to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency, when the foreign minister came back to Iran, the Iranians were unhappy and they walked back on the agreement. It's nonsense. These Western diplomats are just making things up. The foreign minister, when he signs a piece of paper, that means he has a mandate. So the West, in order to justify the fact that they did not abide by their commitments, they try to pretend that the foreign minister doesn't have power and that, when he signs something, he says something, that you can't take it seriously. No, he signed a piece of paper. He speaks on behalf of the state. Iran did not walk back on the agreement. It was the Europeans that walked back on the agreement. But they like to say these sort of things in order to justify the fact that they're dishonest, the fact that they lied to the Iranians. They say if you sign this agreement, we'll cooperate and solve the problem. And when Iran did sign it, they didn't do so. So we do not have rogue actors in Iran, whether it's the armed forces or the foreign ministry or any other part of the state. It is structured. Anyone can read about it in the uh, the Constitution. They can find the Constitution online. So whether it's the Guard or the armed forces or the Air Force or the Navy or the police or the judiciary, anything that's carried out in Iran is just like in the West. One of these gentlemen who I was speaking, I'm telling you about, said to me, in the West, I said, in Iran, the intelligence agencies may arrest someone, but the foreign ministry may be against it. And I said, in the West, do you think the foreign ministry makes decisions about arrests? There's a young Iranian, that this young girl, she was arrested for over a year, I think, and she was held in solitary confinement in France, and she was just recently released, and she's still not allowed to leave the country, from my understanding. Ms. Esfandiari or something like that. She was in jail for a year and a half in solitary confinement. It's obvious that she was being held for political reasons. The French intelligence agencies often obviously took her as a hostage to as a to be able to have leverage on Iran. But does that mean that the French foreign ministry made the decision? Of course not. The French foreign ministry does what the state states and negotiates it within the framework that the state of France determines, for good or for ill. The same is true in Iran. So we have no rogue elements. If someone is arrested in Iran, it's not the guards or anyone else, it is the state. If there are negotiations and Iran signs a piece of paper, it is not a faction, it is the state. But this is something that the West does not want to recognize because they always want to see Iran as abnormal so that they can justify non-compliance on their behalf, so that they can justify not moving towards problem solving, so that they can justify aggressive behavior in the hope that somehow the problem will go away. And it won't, because Iran will grow stronger and Iran will move on to new partners. And we already see how the global majority within it, new friendships and new partnerships are being formed to the detriment of the West because of their own arrogance and because of their own abusive nature and their murderous policies.
I hope that in the West we would learn about the Iran internal policies and what's going on in Iran, because many of these people outside of Iran may think that in Iran is all about, every time they're talking about Iran, Russia, and China, is, it's some sort of dictatorship. They don't. The most, the most, the worst criticism comes from within Iran. You look at the Iranian media today; many people are talking freely about criticizing the policies of government. But when you look at the West and the way they're thinking of Iran, it seems that everyone is somehow, the state is controlling everything. I don't know how long does it take for us to to make the statement, to make the to make it clear for the Western people to understand the reality of Iran. After all, with all these differences between the left, right, the center in Iran, we know, as you've mentioned, the state, after all, decides about everything, with all these people coming together and deciding about the future of the decisions. But it's not that much understood in the West,
It's
Professor.
not actually very difficult, Nima, with AI. All they have to go, all they have to do is go to different Telegram channels belonging to different Iranian news websites and political activists and see what they're writing. They'll translate them now. Soon, I saw some of the shows that I've been on. They translated into Spanish and other languages with AI using my voice. The world is changing. It's not that difficult. All they have to do is go into these Telegram channels from the different political parties in Iran and activists, and they'll see how diverse it is. But just yesterday, I think it was Professor Falk, I think, who was arrested in Canada. He's 95 years old, and I think he's Jewish. And he was investigating from my end. I didn't read the news, unfortunately, but uh, he was going to Canada to see their role or to investigate their role in the genocide. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know the details, but the point is they arrested a 95-year-old man, a professor who worked for the UN. He was a UN investigator, and then they speak, and then the Canadians have the audacity to speak about human rights to the Iranians. And the facade is gone. The mask has been removed. They are in no position to talk to us about human rights. They're no position to talk about Hezbollah as some sort of terrorist organization. Hezbollah is the shining star of humanity. They went and sacrificed themselves and their families because the genocidal regime targeted their families in order to divert Israeli forces from Gaza to stop, to ease the pressure on Gazan children, to decrease the number of kids who are being massacred. Who is, and then they go and arrest a 95-year-old man who wants to investigate the role that Canada played in the Holocaust in Gaza, and then they have the audacity to speak to us about human rights. They have the audacity to speak to me or others who survived chemical attacks about human rights. Did any of our missiles bring down apartment blocks in Germany, in the United States, in France, in the UK? Have we ever endorsed airstrikes on their countries, on their nuclear installations? Have we supported a Holocaust anywhere? Have we supported a genocide? They have. So they are in no position to talk about human. In their countries, they commodify women, they objectify women. That is policy in the name of empowerment. They sexualize women. In Iran, with all its problems, the objective is not to allow women to be commodified and sexualized and objectified. So, but as I said earlier, in my department, as I'm an affiliate in one department and I'm a member of another department in two different faculties of the University of Tehran. The people who've been hired in recent years in these two departments that I'm involved with, the majority of them are women. The majority of the young academics in these two departments are women. But the image that they've created in the West, just like when the Israelis brought down these buildings and slaughtered people, they said this is an intelligence coup, or these were precision strikes. What, like people don't know that a general lives in that building? It's not an intelligence coup. It's madness on behalf of a mad regime that considers everyone else subhuman, and the West endorses that worldview. And so they can kill kids. And they've been doing it for decades. But over the past two and more than 2 years now, they've been doing it in such huge numbers that even those who've been sound asleep, they've been asleep in the past, they've woken up to the reality. And those who don't accept reality, their hearts are so dark and their hearts are so hardened that no matter what crimes are committed, they will not acknowledge it.
Professor Marandi, let me ask you something different. When you look at the situation in Ukraine and the war with Russia, do you feel that the West, when you look at Europeans together with the United States, do you think are they learning something from the war in Ukraine that would hugely, in my opinion, benefit them when it comes to Iran and China, when it comes to the Middle East and any sort of new wars that they may think of? Is there any sign, in your opinion, that they're learning from the war in Ukraine?
No, no. Again, I don't want to go into detail because these Western people who I've been speaking to recently, I don't want them to feel embarrassed. But we had a discussion on Ukraine, and I said, the smart thing to do would be for you to end the war. And they said, well, after all the Russians did, I said, well, you started it. You shouldn't have carried out the coup, and you started this war on behalf of the United States, and now the new government in the United States has turned away, and you still won't quit. And they said they spoke about the Russians killing someone through poisoning. I said, you gassed Iranians for during the for years, you helped Saddam gas Iran for years. So you're going to you want you have no moral authority to complain about Russia killing someone allegedly wherever in the UK or wherever. Hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine are dying thanks to your governments. Finish it. You've lost the war. Cut your losses. Just get it over with. Yes, you have to give concessions. You've lost. But no, the Europeans, in their arrogance, they think they have to win. They always have to win. And for them, morality is not an issue. These regimes are the most immoral on this planet. Gaza has proven it beyond any doubt. But it's in their arrogance. They cannot come to terms with the reality that they cannot defeat Russia. They cannot come to terms with the reality that when it comes to morality, Iran, Hezbollah, Ansar, Yemen, the resistance, the axis of resistance, is far, far above them when it comes to moral standing. We're not in the same league. But they can never accept that because they're sort of like Zionists. They see themselves as exceptional. They see themselves as more civilized. And because of that, they simply can't come to terms with reality. They cannot negotiate based on reality. They cannot think based on reality. They cannot interact with others like the Iranians based upon reality. It's not possible for them. And they cannot end the conflict and accept reality because they say, no, somehow we have to win. Well, you're not going to win. All you're doing is you're destroying Ukraine permanently, and you're destroying your own economies, and you're impoverishing your own people, and you're killing ordinary Russians too. But no, they have not learned. They will have to come to terms with reality. They will, because this policy is not going to succeed. The world is turning against the West, and Trump can lash out at Venezuela and then bomb uh, Nigeria and, I don't know, occupy South Africa, or he can. At the end of the day, this is not going to end well for the empire. So this is an empire that's declining and it's lashing out. But the more it lashes out, the more destructive it is, but the quicker the fall. You're muted. Nemo.
Actually, I've just noticed that I'm using the wrong mic on my system because this is the first, the first time I'm using this website. That's why I don't know what was the quality of my voice during the
Your
talk.
voice was excellent for me throughout. It was just this 1 or 2 seconds where you're cut off. From the beginning of the show, everything was normal for me. I don't know about your viewers.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. It was a great pleasure to talk to you again.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima. It's always an honor, always a pleasure. And I'm very grateful to your viewers for listening.
See you soon, Professor Marandi.
See you.